Man, Dr. Rob Bell. So I'm a sports psychology coach. So I work with athletes, coaches, and teams on mental toughness. So how do we perform our best when it matters the most? And my belief is that everyone's an athlete. Our office is just different.
Mhm.
So that athlete mindset that we need in life. And yeah, man, I've written 8 books on mental toughness. I've worked with several PGA Tour champions, and then just athletes at all different sports, man, from pro tennis to obviously basketball, and um, yeah, man, been blessed to do what I do. On a competitive mindset. I mean, I love ultra marathons, so I love Ironmans. I love competing in that aspect. Father, got 2 kids, and just try and get a little bit better every day. So that's a
Mhm.
quick background on me, I guess, man.
Well, that's quite an impressive resume, Rob. 8 books, PGA Tour tennis training. That's so cool.
Yeah, nice.
And so why don't you kind of give us a little bit about your story? What kind of got you into mental toughness? What made you so passionate about it? What are some
Yeah.
of the books you've been writing? Kind of let us, the listeners, know on what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I got into the field because I was an athlete that always thought too much. Like I always say there's like 4 different types of athletes, and I was athlete number one. I was Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. I was the athlete that thought way too much, couldn't shut off the mind. And when things were good. But when things were bad, when there were, setbacks, didn't know how to adjust, didn't really know how to come back. So I was coach's worst nightmares. I was a coach. The coaches hated me, man, because you had no idea who you were going to get. And that sort of planted the seed in it, and it would just never. Each sport was a little bit different. Baseball was mine, like with soccer, never really thought a whole bunch. With baseball, I was constantly thinking and would get in my own way.
Mhm.
And then when I got to college and I took that first psychology class, got had a pretty bad accident, self-inflicted wound in terms of falling off a cliff. So that ended my baseball career,
Jeez.
and that was where, I fell off an 80-foot cliff, and that led to me taking that first psychology class that was really just imprinted upon my heart. This is what I want to do with my life, is work with athletes, coaches, and teams. And I just didn't know exactly what it looked like at the time, but when I took that class, then my life, and I call them hinge moments, but that everything changed.
Mhm. That's what you fell off an 80-foot cliff?
Yeah, man. I was like heading into college. My extracurricular activities really included partying, and I was great at it. I mean, I
Mm.
was getting an A+ in that, no problem. And when I got to college, now I have no accountability, no responsibility, and I can have partying at the same time. And baseball, it's like what could possibly go wrong? So for some reason, this is a Division II school in West Virginia, a lot of mountains in the in that state.
Mhm.
And for some reason, we were partying near this bridge, and this bridge was this cliff, and I just ended up walking off a 80-foot cliff, probably about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Just had no idea where I was, and it was the cause and solution to
Yeah.
me surviving that fall. They craned me up, take me to the hospital. My mom's a nurse,
Oh.
and I mean, I fractured my back, broke my arm, but I was conscious during the whole time, and then that was really a hinge moment, like these moments that happen in our life that change the trajectory of things. Because I always say like every door has a hinge, and a door without a hinge is a wall. It just doesn't work. And sometimes these are the things that happen to us that change the trajectory. If you ever hear about doors opening and closing in life, that's because of a hinge, right? And
Mhm.
that was a hinge moment, man, that made all the difference.
I love that metaphor because obviously at the time, I'm sure you were like, this is devastating. My life's over. But I'm sure that's the biggest, before and after moment that kind of led you down this path. And now you're doing all this stuff with psychology. I'm sure that was one of the biggest
Yeah.
transformations. And that's
Yeah,
kind of,
Jack, I mean, there was a lot of pain that goes in with messing up like that,
yeah.
and when you mess up and then there's embarrassment. Um, I remember a couple years later, just and however we think about Lance Armstrong is fine, man. But he said an epic quote. He said, "If you ever get a second chance of life, you gotta go all the way." When I
Mhm.
got a second chance, I wasn't gonna blow it. And that's what solidified there, man.
That's such a cool story, Rob. Um, so cool. So why don't we start with what do you think, especially you since you work with so many different sports, and I love that the golf was the and tennis was the biggest ones you talk about, just because that's more of a one person sport. So there's a lot more pressure on yourself and there's a lot more time to kind of overthink like some of the problems you had. What do you think are the biggest problems or the most common problems that you see in youth athletes and the athletes that you train mentally that could help some of the listeners that are listening right now?
So, I mean, I've got like a hierarchy of mental toughness. So even on my website, man, it's, I kind of chart it out in terms of like, hey, here are the hierarchy of skills. Now, and no matter what though, what it's always getting back to is confidence and belief in yourself. That's what it's always getting back to, one way or another. Can't let go of mistakes. Why can't we let go of mistakes? Because the belief isn't there, right? Well, why is the focus off heading into important moments? Well, because the belief's not there. The mental game is simple, it's just not easy. And it
Hmm.
is 100% always getting back to that skill,
Yeah.
that belief, trust in yourself. And then we can always unpack and explore, but that's what it's getting back to.
And that's perfect. You put it perfectly. Like, simple is the ultimate form of sophistication. It's just so much easier said than done. It is really simple, but to actually apply it, that's where it gets really hard. And that's kind of why I'm so passionate about this podcast, is I'm trying to make it applicable for kids to learn how to do things like build confidence or learn how to let things go.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you would teach your athletes, or maybe even mental training tools, or tips and tricks, whether it's journaling? How do you help them breed confidence for someone that is struggling to believe? Like, how do you actually get them there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's, different sources of confidence, right? How do you know you can do something? Well, you've done it before, right? Well, that's past performance is a huge indicator of confidence, but the stage is always going to change. And, the next level that we get at, we may be really, really comfortable, confident, cool, calm, and collected in our current situation, but we go up to the next level and now we're thinking a whole bunch. We're not as, relaxed as we were before, which is an indication of confidence. So, uh, I remember reading a long time ago, coach, where the majority of battles, like 90% of battles in war, were never won with a frontal assault. And here's my point, right? The battles got won when they flanked their opponent
Hmm.
and they were able to hit them from the side. So when we address confidence head on, well, what we're doing is we're taking a frontal approach to confidence, which doesn't mean like you can't necessarily have a frontal approach. But the issue is, look, if I am struggling with my confidence, what it starts pointing back to is that there's something wrong with me, right? There's something wrong with my belief. So if I'm not as confident as I need to be, if there's something wrong with me, that becomes a really difficult thing to change. So we got to strip that part away. So it's not addressing confidence head on. What we got to really address, the way we flank the opponent, which is ourselves, is we have to address what are the components that are going into the confidence. And a lot of the times, the biggest thing is what we're focused on. So I always say focus is what breeds confidence and what we're focused on. If you notice, if you talk to any athlete that's doing really well, what are they thinking about? Well, nothing, right? Well,
Hmm.
okay, well, a lot of times it's not nothing, but what is it? Well, I'm focused on what I want to have happen. When we're not playing well, what are we focused on instead? We're focused on not making mistakes, not messing up. So we're focused on where we don't want to be. The
Yep.
focus is wrong. Well, it's really tough to be confident when you have the incorrect focus. That's the step that we got to start with there, is addressing the focus, because that's what really leads to that confidence.
That's beautiful. My favorite analogy for what you just said in terms of trying to not focus on the what you don't want to happen versus the how is,
Yeah,
you have two trees, you're riding a bike, and there's a space in between the two trees. You're not going to focus on the two trees to get through the space in between them, right? You're going to focus on how you're actually
that's
going to
right.
do it. So that's a great way to
Yeah,
kind of,
it's a good one, man.
yeah. And so that's beautiful. So essentially what I got from that is to flank not facing confidence head on is to get to the root of those beliefs and the focus of the confidence itself. So what would be your suggestion then, to change the focus? So what would you say the focus is of the kids that are struggling mentally, and what do we need to change that focus to flank our confidence so we can actually get to the bottom of why our belief system is struggling?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? You really have to pay attention and be aware of what are the thoughts that we're feeding ourselves on a daily basis, you know? Um, Look, it's really difficult to be extremely confident in yourself. And why is that? Well, because there's so many different forces trying to point you in different directions and pull your focus away. Simple is powerful. We just got to keep it simple. I think you got to keep the picture small. If the picture gets too big, if you start focusing on, hey, what this means, if you start focusing on results, statistics, winning, losing, it's going to get the focus off of the process and what you're trying to do, and it's going to focus on results. So, like the fear, anxiety, stress, all that's rooted in confidence, but it's also rooted in the focus of we're focused on the results and what it means. Now, where where do we really get punched? Well, when we have a bad game, it's not necessarily it is the bad game, but then we're going to hear it from coach. Then we might hear it from like one of our teammates. Then we're going to hear it from our parents on the way home, right? Then it's staying with us. Well, it's those type of scenarios and instances and circumstances that impact the belief and the confidence in ourselves and then are impacting that focus. Picture gets way too big. We start focusing on what it means in the context rather than just the game and what we're trying to do. Got to
That's
keep the picture small, brother. Got to keep the picture small.
I love it. Keep the picture small. Yeah, so essentially focus on less things, and that's kind of what we're doing when our confidence is scattered. And when our brain is scattered, right, we're not focused on this moment. I like to say, you know, growth potential is a gauge of how present you actually are. And when we're focused on things like results or what other people are going to say, those are just, simulations in our brain that isn't the moment you have. Like problems normally are just future fears. Like we're being anxious about something that could happen, which means it's
Right.
not actually here, right? And so the more present you are, the more focused you're on your growth right now, the more room there is going to be um, for your growth.
How did you say that, coach? You said problems are what? Future.
So problems are illusions. Like if you actually ask yourself every moment, do I have a problem right now? Almost every time it's going to be a no. Because if you do have a problem,
Right.
you address it immediately. But what the fear is coming from is kids are thinking about what could happen, or um, it's just a future thought. It's a future scare. And so when we teach them how to get rid of that scattered brain, like you said, keep the picture small and focus on right now, you realize that those problems are kind of just illusions that you're tricking yourself with. And that's what's hindering the growth. So the more you can focus on here, the more potential there is for growth, because you're going to be intentional with everything you're doing. And so, like you said, you put it perfectly. We have a notebook with all our kids for our basketball training sector of the company, and it helps them analyze kind of the direction they're going, but we make them completely process oriented, because you're going to get so much farther if you need an aim, right? So that's why you set a goal, but then you forget about it. That's why you're doing what you do. But you want to be but also aimless, because if you're aimless, you're here now, and that's going to grow you way farther than just getting attached to the goal, which is what most athletes do. So you're kind of limiting yourself in that capacity because we aren't in this moment. Um,
Hmm. Well said.
yeah, so that's really the best way for the listeners right now to remember, you're limiting your growth the farther away you are from this moment. Because you can only grow in this moment. You can't grow by thinking about the future or thinking about the past. You can only grow if you're thinking about right now. And so that's kind of what our mental training curriculum is about, is how can we intentionally be the best person in this moment as much as possible. And it's
See,
kind of what
I'm writing down my notes here, man.
yeah, I'm writing down your stuff too. I love learning from new people and new perspectives. Um, but I love the stuff you're saying. And it's funny how we're kind of talking about the same thing. We just put it into different words, which is
For
also great
sure.
for other kids to hear, because your words might resonate better with some of the kids listening. My words might resonate better. But
Right.
it's important to know for the listeners, like we're saying the same thing essentially. So don't get lost in the analogies to make it easier for you to understand. Still remember the core value of what we're trying to say. But
Yeah, indeed.
that's awesome, Rob. And so why don't we dive in a little bit? Let's dive into kind of your experience with pro athletes. So you talked about PGA Tour tennis players. Um, why don't you
And
describe?
that's going beyond, man. I mean, that's been from football, basketball. I mean, all different pros, but
Yeah, I
pretty
love
much.
it. So why don't you kind of dive deep into your experiences with those athletes and kind of not only what you helped with them, but your biggest realizations on the journey of what people are still struggling with. Because I'm sure you're still continuing to learn the more you communicate, the more you watch and observe these athletes and what they're
Sure.
struggling with.
Yeah, I think two things that kind of jump out. One is the mental game is more about subtraction than it is addition.
Mhm,
Um, the fact of you just have to have somebody that is going to be knowledgeable about what you're doing, where you're trying to go. And I call these kind of lightning rod people. Like they are going to protect sort of you from those lightning strikes that are going to happen. And you can't keep that stuff in. Like you have to be able to get that stuff out. And when you get the stuff out, it takes the power away from the fear or whatever, the anxiety, the pressure that you're going to be under. And that's why the mental game is more about subtraction. It's about removing those things that are not that important. And but we do that all the time, right? And that was what I wrote I can't wait to be patient about is because we said the urgency trumps the important. If urgency trumps the important, it's very easy for our focus to get off. We start focusing on the wrong things. But that alone has really been a cornerstone of my coaching in terms of how do we get out of our own way? It's about removing things rather than adding it. Well, that's not the best sales technique. Okay. You try to come in and tell
mhm,
somebody, look, we're going to start removing things. Um, it might sound good, right? But it's like, no, no, no. Like, well, I need to add this A, B, and C here. And where's my folder that I need to like get it? Like, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into keeping it simple. But look, we inherently just make it more complicated than what it needs to be. The other part that I have found, especially working with pro athletes, is they're always trying to get back to their neutral. And what I mean by their neutral is you just have to know your fundamentals, your basics for success, what it is that get you to where you are, because that's the recipe. If you try changing the recipe a whole lot, you try start doing a whole different cake. So you're always having to get back to what are those fundamentals? How do I prepare? What is it that works for me?
mhm,
If you don't know that, then what happens is we start searching and we start searching and really quickly we get away from even knowing what our neutral is. Because if you just add two different ingredients to the cake, it's going to make a different cake totally, right?
mhm,
Doesn't matter. I mean, just try doing that next time you bake a cake. Add two different ingredients and see how it turns out. Well, we do that all the time because we're always looking to get better. And how do I get better? Well, improve this, improve this. There's always a time accuracy um, level of commitment that comes to it. I mean, the time component alone is huge. And because we spend more time on this means we're spending less time on something else.
mhm,
And the way that I see it then is it's really easy to get away from your neutral and what it was that made you successful to begin with. And that's in terms of the pro athlete, that's what I'm helping them get to as well, is making sure you know what cake you make the best and what's that neutral sort of look like. So hopefully that part makes sense, man.
Oh, that's awesome, and I would definitely agree with that, like, for younger kids, you're definitely still learning about a lot of the adding, figuring out what your cake ingredients are actually even consisting of, but definitely as you get older, it's more about learning how you're kind of tricking yourself or, falling into these, I like to call them illusions that, are making you think something's real, but it's actually not, and that's I would say my curriculum setup is the exact same way. It's more about breaking down our relationship with things, and it's not to say, like, kids that we don't need these negative emotions. Like we still need some negative emotions. Like if you don't have fear, you would put your hand on the stove and not be scared to do that. That's a simple example. You do need a base level of these negative emotions. You need suffering, like we were talking about earlier, to of course learn from that and grow yourself. So there's a place for everything. Like all emotions want to belong, but our relationship with these negative emotions are definitely way too high right now, or we're using them too much. And that's kind of what I like to say is that the problem that everyone still has is that the way our brain is wired does not match our lifestyle, right? We are wired to be negative. We're like Velcro to negative and slides to positive because we had to survive, right? And we had to reproduce, but we can basically do nothing now and still live. And so what that means is we don't need all this fear, for example, for something like sports, which is a game, it's supposed to be fun. And so our lifestyle isn't matching the way our brain is wired. And it's not about adding new things to our brain, it's about breaking down the habits we have that are actually making us struggle more. Um,
Mhm.
and so examples like that, like again, it comes back to where are we living? Because anytime our brain is constantly thinking, most of the time it's either going to be in the past or in the future. And if we blindly listen to our thoughts, it's like if you go into virtual reality, right? And you forget you're in virtual reality, then it does become real. And so I'm not invalidating anybody's feelings. Like when you have
Right.
these anxious or depressed thoughts, they're very real, but you're the one listening to the thoughts that are causing that emotion. And that's another great point to remember is that thoughts, a lot of the times, are what cause emotions. You can have emotions first, but that rarely is the case. And so it's just about catching yourself, being aware when you're in this loop of, am I gonna miss this putt or this is a really big putt? Everybody's watching me. It's not about, suppressing, pushing away those thoughts. It's just being aware of it because you can catch yourself. Oh, this is when I'm tricking myself. This is how I'm tripping myself up. And so it's not about adding, it's just about becoming aware of the things you need to, like you said, subtract or not getting caught in those illusions. So I think you put it perfectly there. And one thing I will also say, the slowness you talked about. And so when I first started, especially with the business, like I was all about speed, efficiency, productivity. Um, and it's so funny how the old saying that you learn in like fifth grade about how the slow man wins the race, the reason that's so true, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that the more slow you are, right, the more your body slows down, is the more your brain's going to slow down, and the more you can be here. So when you're slower, you're more intentional with everything you do. You're reflecting on what's the best action I can take to be the best version of myself right now. That's what happens when we're slow. But if we're always trying to be busy, productive, efficient, we're not having the slowness and reflection and awareness in our head to be the best version of ourselves now. If we're rushing, that means we don't want to be here. That means we want to be somewhere else, like the future or
Mhm.
accomplishment of these goals. And that's making it worse because you don't have that growth potential that I was saying. And that comes from how present you actually are. So the more we're rushing or the more we're thinking about the future, what could happen, you're hindering that growth potential essentially. Um,
I love it, man.
yeah. So I love that the patience is like the biggest skill separator I like to say is being your ability to be bored. And that's basically nobody right now because we have phones and basically anything that can escape this boredom. But when we can be bored, you have such good reflections about where you're at, who you are, kind of how you're tricking yourself. And that happens when we take the time to slow down, like you said, the ability to be patient. So I just, for all the listeners right now, I think being slow, patient is the new form of growing yourself faster because
Yeah.
um, so it's counterintuitive, but I definitely would say stop rushing because you're trying to get outside this moment.
Mhm.
Um,
Indeed, man.
yeah, that's awesome. And so you talked a little bit about your patient book. You can why don't you talk about whatever kind of is because I'm sure your eighth book is obviously probably a lot better than your first book because you're continuing to learn as you train more athletes.
Right.
Why don't you talk about, your favorite books that you've written and the ones you think that would help the kids the most if they were listening to this for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, the one over my right shoulder there, Puke and Rally, it's not about the setback, it's about the comeback.
Mhm.
I've probably gotten the most feedback from youth athletes on that one. The one I hear about from coaches and parents the most is don't should on your kid, build their mental toughness. Uh, but I'm just most geeked and proud of. I can't wait to be patient, man, because the most powerful resource that we have is time. Anybody, I mean, they can go to can'twaitbook.com. Just download the infographic that we have there, man, like the daily focus roadmap. How do you get the most out of every day without succumbing to that which is just urgent. But yeah, man, patience is we hear about the virtue of it, we hear about the importance of it. um but I'm looking at with subtraction, the reason why subtraction, the mental game is more about subtraction as addition, is because it's way harder to remove things than it is to add things in life. I mean, it's just way harder to do. If you tell me, Rob, you got to go run 10 miles or 15 miles or 26 miles. Okay. If you tell me I have to fast for a day, that's gonna be a little bit harder for me. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
like, um, so patience is, you know, a lot of being able to stay committed to your process and what you're doing and trusting and having faith and hope that the results will be there. That's going to lead to patience. And that's the one, man. I'm just looking at the process requires perspective, but the product is what requires patience.
that's awesome. One and I actually had this realization the other day. Um, so I was eating my dinner and my dog loves to, sit there patiently and wait for to see if I'm gonna
Oh
get my
yeah.
food. And a good analogy is, if anytime he's pestering me or annoying me, while I'm eating my food, I don't have this feeling like I want to reward him. But if I eat my food for 20 minutes and he sits there quietly and, he's waiting for something, I feel I feel inclined to reward him. And essentially that analogy is kind of just like, the universe or essentially your process is going to be rewarded if you stay patient. And like you were saying, the more patient we are, the more we're going to stick to that process. Because if we're not patient, we're going to think, like you said, you're going to want to add, okay, this isn't working, right? We're going to go add something. We're going to do something else. And that's the problem is that people change courses probably way too fast when things aren't working.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
you need to wait a long time to see if it is actually working.
And
So that was
that's the tough part, man. Like who wants to wait?
yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
That's a really good analogy, man, because we always like, no matter what, even if we're going to reward our dog, like, because she's a different dog when she's waiting for food. I mean, it's just like there's nothing else that matters, right? So, and she's chocolate lab, so I mean, she could eat all the time, but we
Mhm,
never feed her at the table.
mhm,
And so she's always getting her reward like at a certain place as well. You know what I mean? So I think that's how we have to think about it, man. Like in terms of, yeah, the dog waiting for the reward. Your reward's going to be probably at a different spot too, rather than just at that table. So I like that one, man. That's a good one.
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well done, Jack.
this has been already an awesome call, Rob, and I'm so glad I made this connection. Some of the questions I like to ask towards the end of the podcast, and I
Yeah.
do want to do tons more with you, is kind of more reflections on yourself. And so my favorite one to ask is if you could ask you or tell your previous self, a couple things in terms of it can be about the mental side of the game, but or life advice in general. What are the biggest things that if you could have told yourself at a younger age, what would those things consist of? But obviously, I'm sure you're glad your journey went exactly how it did because you wouldn't be where you are today because of that.
Yeah, I like, and that's why I really dig the like when athletes when they write like letters to their younger selves. Like I love reading those, man, because those are
Yes.
fantastic nuggets there. I mean, look, my issue was off the field stuff, and part of what I would definitely tell myself is that I wanted to have a good time. That was it. Now there were some underlying issues that were going on with life that wasn't really aware of, and that's why I wanted to like self-medicate through that time. But that was the biggest thing, man, is it was all for what? For wanting to have a good time. And that's what caused me to not get the most out of my potential.
Mhm,
That's what I would have told myself, man, is being able to surround yourself with better people. You show me your friends, I'll show you your future, sort of thing.
mhm,
Um, and that was because it was off the field issues for me. That's what led to it. Um, and then that led to more pressure and more pressure. So it was that would be the biggest thing, man, is simply stay focused on what you're doing on the most important things.
got it. That's said perfectly. Before we go, and actually I have one more question before I ask
Yeah,
this.
man.
What was the daily focus roadmap you were talking about? Do you kinda wanna elaborate on that? I thought that was something that could be
Yeah, yeah. People are always looking for like they want the nuggets of it, right? Like, yeah, there are gonna be people that read the book.
Yep.
Um, but I wanted to take out, well, where how do we win the day? What are the things that we need to do for focus? And so for example, like the daily focus roadmap, again, people can just download it. Just go to can'twaitbook.com or my website, drrobbell.com, and they can download it. And it's for instance, like the first hour of the day sets the rudder for the rest.
Mhm.
Like how you're setting up the first hour of your day makes a really big impact on your focus, on your confidence level, not only your discipline, but so I'm always about, hey, how are you crushing that first hour of the day? Um, just like the first 10 minutes of practice, how important the first 10 minutes of practice is. First 10 minutes of practice goes bad.
Mhm.
What's the next 10 minutes? Well, coach is making us run, coach is yelling at us. And then we need another 10 minutes to kind of rebound from that and then start again. So now we've wasted 30 minutes of time because that first part was not well. And it's the same thing with the first hour of the day. So there's just like one little nugget for them, and then we just have a bunch of different others there, and it's just the infographic, easy download.
That's awesome. And yeah, so all you listeners go check that out and we'll put that all over the captions and SEO stuff, Rob, so they can all go look at that stuff.
Nice.
Um, and then the last thing I was going to ask, Rob, so the reason I'm passionate about this podcast is because right now there's not really anything out there of free applicable tools that people can do um, to, try and intentionally rewire that brain that they have, like we talked about. So if what would be your what's one of your favorite or go-to kind of activity tools, if you do any with your athletes, that you would want to give to the kids listening or adults or parents listening to this episode?
Damn.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
So I'm certain. I know I'm searching my files, coach, because I'm going back. I'm looking at what are all those. I would say this. It's just our most precious resource is time. When
Hmm.
we're younger, I mean, look at the supply demand theory of economics. When there is a lot of supply and little demand, the price is low.
Hmm.
When there is lower supply and higher demand, the price goes up. It's the same thing with time. When we're younger, we have all the supply in the world we want. Yeah, the demand sort of increases, you know what I mean? But it's nothing compared to later in life. In
Hmm.
life, now the supply is down, now the demands are up. And so now time becomes a whole lot more appreciated. Time is our most precious resource. Do not be in any hurry to get to that championship game. I can't wait for this. I can't wait for that. What are we really saying? We're saying you're in charge of time, which you're not, right? Time is undefeated, it's untied, can't beat it. So approach your mental game problems, approach your life, approach that which is good through the most precious resource, which is time. That's why I wrote the book, man. The laws of patience. What are the killers to urgency? Because you got to be urgent at times. I mean, there's no easing into a street fight. If you ease into a game, going to see how this is going. I mean, you're going to be down. But on the flip side of that is when you try pressing, when you try pushing situations. If you're a point guard and bring it up, and you try going 1-on-3, not being patient, right? I mean, that's just not a smart play. So there's this balance of urgency and patience that comes with life, and it's just all tying back into the power of time. And that's where I look at it is it goes so fast that
Hmm.
we're not even aware of it. Start looking at your time for improving your mental game.
I love it because that's definitely a big thing that we teach in our curriculum is our relationship with time. And one of the things that's
Yeah,
helped me
it's
most in
great.
life is you never, ever, ever, ever want to wish time away. Because people get this false sense like you have time. None of us have time. You're not guaranteed any sort of time. You have no set timeline. So it's absolutely foolish to wish that time away, kind of what you were saying, or
Hmm.
if I'm only, focused on this goal, you're missing the only time that you have. So it's having that balance, that aim, but also enjoying the journey, being here on the journey. You know, all of it's the same best part. And so that's the biggest thing I would say to reiterate what you just said. Never wish time away. I think that's the best thing we can kind of end for these listeners and try
Yeah.
and catch yourself when you're wishing that time away, because you're guaranteed no time. And I try to help my kids have a good relationship with death, and it's very hard for kids or parents to have this if they've never had someone close to them die. But we walk around like we're immortal sometimes, and that's one of the we don't make the right meaning when we're walking around like we're immortal. But when we know it is possible, hey, I'm not going to be here around for a while, you focus immediately on the right things. And so we don't
Mhm.
want to keep death close to be in fear constantly. We want to keep death close so we make meaning into the right things. And so
Right.
that's why we have wisdom's a little bit of a part of our curriculum towards the end. And just adding on top is if you can approach death in a healthy way that isn't making you fearful, you will make meaning, which is the most important thing in your life. And like you said, focus. We'll make meaning into the right things if we keep that death close, right? Because we're not going to focus solely on accomplishments or these quick little moments in life. We're not going to get lost in that illusion if we keep that wisdom. And so I thought everything you said today, Rob, was absolutely awesome. The only thing I want you to leave the listeners, where
Nice.
do you want to find that Laws of Patience book? Where can the listeners find that?
So I can't wait to be patient.
Can't wait to be
They can
patient.
go to, yeah, it's can'twaitbook.com.
Got it. I love it. And I'm actually going to order one myself, Rob.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. And thanks for
Awesome.
having me on, man.
Of course, Rob. Thank you so much for coming on. And
Yep.
I'm, would you be up for doing another one of these? And
For
then,
sure, man. You got it, bud.
awesome.
Yeah, this
I
is
love
good,
it.
man.
I love
I
learning.
got my notes here from you, man. So that's good. Iron
Awesome.
sharpens iron, right?
Yes, exactly. I love learning from you, Rob, and we'll stay in touch. And I'll actually send you my number through the email too, so we can communicate a little easier. Just because it's email, like we both know, your assistant is doing most of the email, so we don't even see it half the time.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah, cool. So let's reconnect sometime in the future, Rob. And thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Peace.